Have you ever looked into the eyes of an elderly person and felt that behind their tired gaze, something ancient and luminous was waiting to be remembered? There is a silence that surrounds old age, a silence that our modern world often fears. We see wrinkles and forget that each line is a verse from a long-forgotten scripture written by the soul itself. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, once said that every stage of life is a classroom for the spirit, but few understand the depth of the final lessons. He hinted at truths so profound that many of his lectures were never made public, truths about the purpose of aging and the sacred preparation for what we call death. What Cayce suggested, and what many ancient traditions echo, is that the later years of life are not a decline but a ripening. Like a fruit that finally releases its fragrance after a long season of growth, the elderly soul is fulfilling the cycle it began long ago. Cayce described the soul as a traveler who gathers wisdom, compassion, and humility through countless lifetimes, and that in the closing chapters of each life, the spirit begins to loosen its grip on the material world. It is not decay, he said, it is liberation. Yet in our society obsessed with youth and speed, we mistake this liberation for loss. We rush to preserve the body and forget to listen to what the soul is trying to tell us through it. Imagine for a moment that the human body is a lantern, and life is the flame that burns within it. In youth, the glass is clear, the flame burns bright, and we see the world vividly. But as the years pass, the glass darkens, cracked by the winds of experience. The light seems dimmer, but in truth it has only grown stronger. So strong, in fact, that it begins to outshine the glass itself. Cayce believed that aging is the process of the soul burning away the illusions of separation, preparing to merge once more with the eternal light from which it came. That is why, for those who see beyond appearances, old age is not an ending, but a sacred unveiling. Cayce's hidden lecture, one that some say was never meant for public release, spoke of a silver thread that begins to shimmer within the elderly as they near the threshold. This thread, he said, is not metaphorical, but energetic. It is the connection between the physical self and the eternal self, a chord of consciousness that hums with memories from other times, other forms, other worlds. As the body weakens, the soul's voice grows louder, and for those who listen deeply, death ceases to be a stranger. It becomes a homecoming. He warned, though, that few are prepared to hear that truth without fear. To those attached to form, to possessions, to identity, the idea of merging back into the infinite feels like erasure. But to the soul, it is freedom, pure, luminous, and absolute. We often think of aging as a thief, stealing beauty, strength, and vitality. Yet Cayce urged us to see it as a teacher, a wise elder who strips away what is temporary so that what is eternal may finally breathe. Think of a great tree in autumn. Its leaves fall, its branches grow bare, and many believe the tree is dying. But what we call death is only the tree's preparation for another spring, another flowering, another expression of life. The elderly are that tree, standing in stillness, their roots deep in the soil of experience, their essence retreating inward to prepare for renewal. In every line on their face lives the story of how the soul has loved, lost, learned, and endured. Perhaps the true forbidden message in Cayce's words was not about death itself, but about how we live before it arrives. He taught that when we see the elderly as fragile, we dishonor the sacred role they play in our collective awakening. They are the keepers of thresholds, the ones who remind us that the veil between worlds is thin, that love does not end, and that consciousness is not contained by flesh. Each smile from an elder, each slow gesture, each gaze lost in memory is a message from the edge of eternity. To truly understand death, Cayce implied, we must first learn to honor those who walk closest to it, not with pity, but with reverence. So what if death is not the opposite of life, but its completion? What if the elderly are not fading away, but simply becoming transparent to the light that has always been within them? Cayce believed that when we begin to see the aged not as broken vessels, but as luminous gateways, we begin to heal our own fear of the inevitable. The body withers, yes, but the soul expands beyond measure. And perhaps when we sit quietly beside an elder and truly listen, not to their words but to the silence behind them, we begin to hear what Cayce heard, the soundless whisper of eternity calling us home, even as we live. Cayce often compared the soul's journey to that of a river, ever moving, always reshaping itself, never truly separate from the ocean it seeks. The elderly, he said, are those who have reached the river's delta, where fresh water begins to meet the salt of the infinite. To the untrained eye, it appears as though the river is ending, losing its identity. But to those who see with the eyes of spirit, it is the moment of union. In those later years, when the body bends and the mind begins to loosen its grip on earthly things, the soul starts remembering what it has always known, that it was never confined to the banks of a single life. The flow that we call aging is, in truth, the current carrying us home. This idea unsettles many because it dismantles the illusion that our worth depends on productivity, appearance, or control. In youth, we build our identities like fortresses, brick by brick, accomplishment by accomplishment. We fill our days with noise to prove that we are still alive. But when the years pass and those walls begin to crumble, something unexpected happens. Silence enters, and within that silence the soul finds its own reflection. Cayce once said that silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of eternity. For the elderly, that silence becomes both a mirror and a doorway. It is in the quiet of their hearts that the first glimpses of the afterlife begin to shimmer, not as visions, but as deep recognition. Imagine a candle at dusk. Its light seems fragile against the encroaching night, yet if you watch closely, you'll see how steady it remains. The darker it becomes, the more visible the flame appears. In the same way, when the body weakens and the mind slows, the soul's light shines with startling clarity. Cayce urged his followers to spend time in the company of elders, not to comfort them, but to learn from them, to witness how grace reveals itself through fragility. The body fades, he said, so that the spirit may be seen. And yet in a culture that prizes youth, we turn our faces away from that radiance. We see only decline where there is, in truth, revelation. To Cayce, the process of dying began long before the final breath. It began in the moments when a person ceased to identify solely with their body. Each small surrender, the loss of strength, of memory, of certainty, was in his view a sacred rehearsal. The soul, he said, learns how to die every day it learns how to let go. What a profound reversal this is from the modern perspective. Where we see tragedy, he saw initiation. Where we see loss, he saw expansion. It is as if the soul uses age as a sculptor uses a chisel, removing layer after layer of what is no longer needed until only the essence remains. There is a tenderness in this stripping away that our hurried world rarely notices. Many elders, when asked about their fears, speak not of death itself, but of being forgotten, of fading into invisibility. And yet Cayce would say that this invisibility is part of the initiation. When the world stops seeing them, the soul begins to see itself. It is the same mystery that mystics of every age have described. When outer light dims, inner light ignites. It is not punishment but grace, a grace that reveals what can only be seen in the twilight of a lifetime. Think of the elderly as sacred mirrors placed along our path. Each of them reflects what awaits us, not in horror but in humility. The wrinkles, the trembling hands, the slower breath, all these are symbols, not signs of decay. They are the physical language of transcendence, the body's way of speaking the soul's truth. Cayce's readings often urged younger souls to learn this language early, to see aging not as an enemy, but as a prophecy of our own return. If we can look at an old man or woman and see not the body but the light flickering through it, something in us shifts. We begin to sense that death is not an intrusion, but an unfolding, not darkness but dawn. And perhaps that is the hidden purpose of the elderly among us, to remind the world that eternity is not a distant place, but a living presence. Cayce's lost lecture suggested that when an elder smiles despite pain, forgives despite disappointment, or loves despite loss, they are performing a kind of alchemy. They are turning time into wisdom, flesh into transparency, and sorrow into peace. In that sense, every wrinkle is not a mark of age, but a signature of grace, a testament that the soul has walked through storms and still remembers how to shine. If only we had the courage to look past appearances, we would see what Cayce saw, the threshold to heaven standing quietly among us, disguised in human form, whispering through the voices of those who have lived long enough to remember who they truly are. Cayce once described death not as a curtain falling, but as a sunrise occurring in another sky. For the soul, he said, there is no such thing as an ending, only a shift in vibration, a change of address in the infinite. What we call death is simply the moment the soul steps out of one room of consciousness and walks into another. The elderly, standing close to that threshold, begin to feel the echo of that transition long before it happens. They speak slower, not because they are forgetting words, but because they are beginning to listen to a different frequency. They dream more vividly, not because their minds are confused, but because another world is already opening its doors to them. If we truly understood this, we would stop mourning what is leaving and start revering what is awakening. Cayce's readings revealed that as the body weakens, the aura, the energetic field surrounding a person, often grows stronger and more luminous. It is as if the soul begins to shine through the thinning fabric of the flesh. He described this radiance as the memory of God within, and believed that those who care for the elderly are actually tending to this sacred flame. When we sit beside them, hold their hands, or listen without judgment, we are not merely offering comfort, we are participating in a divine exchange. Their nearing departure becomes our invitation to awaken. Through them, the universe whispers, "You too are eternal." It is striking how different cultures perceive this stage of life. In many indigenous traditions, the elder is the tribe's bridge to the invisible world. Their presence anchors the community in both past and future. In the West, however, we have built a culture that worships beginnings and fears conclusions. We speak of fighting aging, as though the natural unfolding of life were an enemy to be conquered. Cayce challenged this deeply, reminding his followers that the more we resist the flow of time, the more suffering we create. That which you resist, he said, you bind yourself to repeat. In other words, by fearing old age and death, we invite them again and again in different forms, through anxiety, through restlessness, through the constant hunger for what can never stay. Perhaps that is why Cayce's teachings about the elderly feel so revolutionary even today. They ask us to see aging not as the loss of life, but as its final offering. The elder, he taught, carries within them the distilled essence of human experience, the wisdom of patience, the courage to surrender, and the serenity of perspective. Their eyes no longer chase the horizon. They have learned to watch the sun set without sadness. They understand what few do, that the soul's journey is not about achievement, but about remembrance. To grow old is to slowly remember what you truly are. And that remembrance, Cayce said, is the soul's greatest joy. In one of his rare private readings, Cayce spoke of how many souls, upon reaching old age, begin to revisit moments of their youth, not as nostalgia, but as review. The life passes before the inner eye, he said, not to cause regret, but to gather harvest. Every memory, every choice, every joy and sorrow becomes a seed of consciousness that the soul collects before moving on. It is a sacred inventory, a preparation for expansion. That is why some elderly people speak of seeing long-lost loved ones or feeling at peace, even amid pain. Their souls are already rehearsing their homecoming. They are not fading. They are remembering. There is a quiet dignity in this process that our hurried culture rarely honors. We try to distract the elderly with noise, with endless care routines, with constant reminders of the physical. But Cayce taught that true compassion is not found in prolonging the body's comfort, but in nurturing the soul's passage. It is to sit in silence with them, to listen when they speak of strange dreams, to trust that the unseen world is drawing near. You are never alone in death, he once said, for when the time comes, the light you carry will recognize the greater light, and you will be received. Those words, gentle as they are, contain a power that can dissolve the fear of mortality if truly understood. So perhaps the most transformative teaching hidden in Cayce's message is this: the elderly do not need our pity, they need our reverence. They are not reminders of decay, but living testimonies of endurance, faith, and return. Each time we honor them, we honor the truth of our own journey. Because one day we too will stand at that threshold, listening to that same subtle call, ready to cross the invisible bridge between worlds. And when that day comes, we will realize that death was never something to be conquered, but something to be embraced, a continuation, a soft unfolding of what we have always been. For beyond the body, beyond the years, beyond the breath itself, there is only one reality, the eternal soul, endlessly learning how to love and endlessly finding its way home. If we were to take Cayce's words to heart, we would see that death is not a punishment for being alive. It is the completion of a sacred rhythm. Life breathes us in, and death breathes us out. The two are not enemies. They are the same divine motion playing in opposite directions. Cayce believed that when we come to understand this rhythm, fear begins to dissolve. He said that the soul, in its pure awareness, does not fear transition any more than a wave fears merging back into the ocean. What the ego calls the end is simply the wave remembering the sea. To live wisely, then, is to live already aware of that return, to see each day, each joy, each loss as part of the soul's preparation for reunion. When we begin to look at the elderly with this understanding, something in our hearts softens. We no longer see them as fragile, but as radiant. Like candles that have burned long and faithfully, their light steady even as the wax melts away. Their lives are sermons without words, teaching us the art of surrender. In their slowness we learn patience, in their silence we learn presence, in their acceptance we glimpse eternity. And if we are humble enough to listen, they teach us that love is the only thing that follows us beyond the veil. Every act of kindness, every forgiveness, every moment of compassion becomes the invisible currency of the soul. It is what Cayce called spiritual wealth, and it is the only treasure that death cannot touch. He also spoke of how the transition of the elderly affects those who remain behind. When a soul departs, Cayce said, it leaves behind a resonance, a vibration that can be felt by hearts attuned to love. This is why we sometimes dream of those who have passed or sense their presence in quiet moments. It is not imagination, it is resonance. The soul does not vanish. It expands beyond our limited senses. The elderly who leave us are not gone. They have simply changed rooms, moving into a space where their love can reach us in ways the physical world could not allow. If we knew this with certainty, grief would still ache, but it would no longer wound. We would understand that mourning is not saying goodbye, it is learning a new way to listen. Cayce once compared death to walking through a doorway of light. On one side we are the ones crying. On the other there is laughter, recognition, and the music of reunion. He said that those who cross over are met by souls who loved them before, family, friends, even animals, and that the first sensation after death is not fear, but peace. A peace so complete that words fail to describe it. The elderly, he said, begin to feel this peace even before they pass. It seeps into their eyes, into their stillness, into the way they seem to look beyond us when we speak. They are already glimpsing what awaits, and if we could see through their eyes for just a moment, we would stop fearing death altogether. We would understand that life does not end, it simply changes its melody. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Cayce's message was his reminder that we do not have to wait until old age or death to awaken. You are eternal now, he said. The soul's light burns, even while you dream you are human. The purpose of his forbidden lecture was not to make us worship the afterlife, but to teach us how to live this life as if eternity were already here. When we honor the elderly, we are not only showing respect for their journey, we are awakening our own awareness of the infinite. Their presence becomes a mirror in which we see the timeless essence within ourselves. Each moment we spend in gratitude, compassion, and humility is already a step toward immortality. And so Cayce's hidden teaching is not truly about the dead, it is about the living. It is about remembering that every breath we take is borrowed light, that every encounter is sacred, that every ending is also a beginning in disguise. When we look into the eyes of an elder and see not frailty, but the brilliance of a soul ready to return home, we begin to heal not just our fear of death, but our misunderstanding of life. Because to know that we are eternal changes everything. It changes how we love, how we forgive, how we wake up each morning. It gives us the courage to let go when the time comes, and the tenderness to hold on while we can. So when the next sunset comes, pause for a moment. Feel the air, listen to the stillness between sounds, and remember what Cayce whispered through the veil of his trances, that the soul is never born, and therefore never dies. We are the light watching itself flicker in 1,000 forms, learning through time how to shine without fear. And when we finally understand this, death will no longer be the end of anything. It will be the gentle continuation of everything. If this reflection stirred something within you, share it with others. Tell me in the comments what this truth awakens in your heart, and subscribe to continue walking this path together, one breath, one insight, one soul at a time.